Hi, grandkids. This is Grandma Eva. I'm here to go ahead and I'm going to do a study on the first chapter of the first book of the Bible, and that's called Genesis. And I wanted to do that here on YouTube because I did it live on Facebook, but it's not the same because I want this for my grandkids. So my grandkids, y'all can read this. I mean, y'all can look at this and follow as I'm teaching this. So I'm going to do a brief summary, like a little, just a review of the first book, Genesis, and I'm going to try to do it in 30 minutes, probably the first half because it's 50 chapters long, and maybe do the next 30 minutes, do the rest. I'm going to see what I could do in 30 minutes, all right? Um, so your grandma, excuse my this is the way grandma talks, but let's go ahead and start now, all right? Now, Genesis is the first book of Moses. The first five books that Moses wrote in the Bible. And in the Israelites, the Jewish people call this the Torah or the Pentateuch. But you're going to find out who they are. Who's the Jewish people? Who's the Israelites? This is where you'll find out in the book of Genesis, okay? So let's start off with chapter 1. Now, chapter 1 is about the history of creation. The very first verse says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." Very simple, down to the point, right? Verse 2, the earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. So there was nothing then. So this is where God gets started with the creation of the world, because in the first chapter alone is where we find out that on the first day he said, "Let there be light." So there was light. That was the first day. The second day, there was a sky. That's when he made the sky. The third day, it was the earth and the sea. That's when he makes the grass, the trees, the fruits, the seed, and the dry land. So that's where we get all our things that we have today, how we can eat and how we have grass for the animals and certain things like that. God started from the very beginning already preparing for the very, like, all the way to the end, okay? Um, on the fourth day, he made the sun, the moon, the stars, which are used for signs, seasons, days, and years. The fifth day is when he created the birds, the fish, and the sea creatures. And the sixth day is when he had the animals on the earth. That's whenever he created the animals of the earth. And man, and the last was woman. And this was on the sixth day. Then we get to, and that was just in chapter 1. That's a lot. But I'm not doing all the details. I'm not reading every single thing in chapter 1 because I'm just doing a review. I'm just giving you a little short summary. I want you to read chapter 1. I want you to see exactly how God did everything. I want you to go in there and see how the Lord spoke to man and how he did these things, okay? So chapter 2, you can follow along, and I'm just giving you little short things, and I want you to, hopefully, I'll do it in a way that you're going to want to go and read these chapters. So chapter 2 is whenever the seventh day came, and God rested on the seventh day. He was so busy in the first chapter, he did everything in 6 days. 6 days, guys. But on the seventh day, he rested. He took time to rest. Now, in this chapter, there's a lot of details on how he created every single thing. He gives more details on the heaven and the earth, on man and on woman, and on the Garden of Eden. Um, he he spends more time on talking about how he created man, and then how he felt uh, it wasn't good for man to be alone, and so that's when he made the beasts, the animals, and all that, and man got to name them, and then it still wasn't good enough. Man was still alone, so he went ahead and that's when he created woman, right? And he not only, it wasn't just woman, he created her as his wife. So, and when he created her, God did the first surgery during that. In chapter 2, he did the first surgery and took the rib out of the man to create woman, the man's wife. So, I mean, to read these chapters, you learn so much, my grandkids, and I want y'all to take that time so you can learn about it, and then you can start passing it down too. All right. Now let's get to chapter 3. Chapter 3 is when the tempting and fall of man. Okay, this is when Satan and the serpent um, tempt Eve, which is Adam's wife, and Eve and Adam they eat the fruit from the tree of good and evil. So God punishes them all. He punishes every single one of them. He punishes the serpent, the woman, which is Eve, and Adam. But the one I think that took it the one that the Lord punished the hardest was Adam, I believe, because Adam, remember, he created Adam first, man, the beast, and all the other animals, and woman was the last. And so God got onto Adam because he disobeyed him. And I'm going to go ahead and read that in chapter 3, and you can follow along if you want. I want you to have your Bibles at this time so you can go ahead and be following along. But in Genesis 3, in verse 17, he says to Adam, whenever he eats from the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, he tells him this. Then to Adam he said, because you have heeded, you listened to the voice of your wife, and have eaten from the tree of which I commanded you, saying, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground for your sake, in toil you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Both thorns and thistle it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the herb of the field. In the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground. So man's going to work hard. He's going to have to labor hard to be able to bring food from the ground and and feed the ground, feed his family through that food that he has to work hard at to make grow from the ground. So curses the ground for your sake. So God also cursed the ground because of man. Because things were just growing out of the ground. God created the Garden of Eden for man. That everything was growing for him. The trees were giving them the fruits for him to eat. The ground, whatever was growing from the ground. But because of the sin that Adam and Eve, committed, especially Adam, he disobeyed God. He cursed the ground. So the ground was not going to be producing things like that for him very easily. He was going to have to go and make it grow the way he wanted it to grow. And it was going to be from the sweat of his brow, his face, he was going to be sweating. And he was going to be doing this until they die. So that's something to think about, you know. But there's more details on what, like, for the woman, he did curse the woman. He tells her she's going to she's going to desire her husband, and she's going to have labor pains. She's going to, have pains when she gives birth to her baby. I mean, you just have to read chapter 3. I wish I could do more details, and I probably will later on. But right now, I just want to do a short summary, a short review on the chapters in the book of Genesis. So then we get to Genesis chapter 4. Now, this is where the first murder happened. This is where we meet uh, Cain as an older person, and his brother Abel, and the and we also get to meet Abel for a very short time, right? But what happens? The reason that you want to know why he murdered him? It all has to do with envy. It all has to do with jealousy. It all has to do with pride. And here you learn to be careful with that, because even God tells Cain to be careful to take control of his anger, because sin is always there at the door waiting, just waiting for you to attack you, to make you do something you shouldn't have done, right? And and if we don't take control of our anger, and we don't take control of those emotions um, right away, then we can sin. So right here in chapter 4, you get to read and learn about the first murder, and also how how merciful God is, because even though the first murder was done, God did not kill Cain. He did mark him, and he did punish him, and he still was allowed to live, and so we get to meet his family, You get like a family tree of Cain also here. Now, in chapter 5, we have the family of Adam, the genealogy, the family tree of Adam. Now, this is where you're going to see where Adam, from Adam to the time of Adam, all the way down to Noah and his three sons. And Adam lived to be 930 years, so it's a long list. And Noah got to live to be 950 years old. So this is a long family tree that you're going to be reading here. And whenever I did this uh, chapter, when I first read it, I did this right here. I did like a piece of paper. I got a piece of paper and I started writing from Adam all the way down. And I started writing how old Adam was whenever his son, because they got blessed. The Lord, you know, their first son Cain killed their second son, but the Lord blessed him with a third son named Seth. And it's from Seth that they're going to continue on with the genealogy. It starts with Seth and it goes all the way down. So um, it shows here how old Adam was whenever he became a grandpa, and how old he was when he became a great grandpa, and how old Seth was, and it goes all the way down until we find Noah and his three sons. And it says that there that Noah's father Lamech says in Genesis chapter 5, you'll see where he says that, hold on. So in Genesis chapter 5, verse 28, if you go there, you'll see where Lamech, which is Noah's father, and he is Adam's like grandson 8 times, you know. So it's like great, 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 8 times grandson. And Lamech lived 182 years, and he had his son Noah. 182 years old, and then finally he had Noah, his son. And he said, "This one will comfort us concerning our work and the toil of our hands, because of the ground which the Lord had cursed." So here, God had cursed the land, remember, because of what Adam and Eve did in the garden, and they got kicked out of the garden, and they got kicked out for a reason. They got kicked out because the Lord he couldn't have them in the garden. In the first chapter, in the third chapter, whenever this happened, he could not have any sin in that garden. That garden was not meant to have sin in it. So he had to kick them out. He had to kick them out so they would be safe, so he could save, them, and at the same time the future generations. He could save us, because God cannot have sin around them. That's something I did not mention from the third chapter, but that's the reason why they were kicked out. Okay, but let's get back to chapter 5, and you see Lamech, the father of Noah, saying, this is like 800 years later from that time, from whenever Genesis chapter 3. So this is like 800 years later or so. And this is whenever he's talking, 900. But there's so many hundreds of years later. And he says that Noah's the one that's going to be the one to stop that curse, where they didn't have to work so hard to toil the ground. And so, and I love this because Lamech, you see, he has faith. There's faith there. And how do we know that this is there? True also is because you can see this is the family tree of Adam all the way down to Noah. So that means that Adam was around to keep telling his grandkids and keep, telling the story of when he was in the garden and passing it on and everything. And then we meet all his other grandsons and how they also talk with God, because Enoch was one of them, and he didn't die because he walked with God. And it says in the Bible that he didn't die because God took him. And then Methuselah, which was Lamech's father, he lived the longest than everybody, but he died in the flood. Okay, so here is where we get to chapter 6, and in chapter 6 it's where the wickedness judgment of man. So God is pleased with Noah, and God, starts walking with Noah also, and he starts talking with Noah, and he starts telling Noah what's going to happen in the world, that he's going to cause this flood. So he wants them to prepare an ark. and he starts giving them detailed information, instructions on how he wants this ark built. Because this ark is what is going to save him and his three sons. So it's going to be Noah, his two wives, Noah, his three sons, and Noah's wife. He only has one wife, and each of his sons have a wife. So it's going to be three, right, men, four men, and four women. That's how many are going to be in the ark. And he tells, I mean, you got to read Genesis chapter 6 to find out exactly what God tells him about the animals, how they're going to be taken care of, and how he wants everything done down, down to detail. You'll probably hear how the people were making fun of him and everything like that. You want to know how all that went, then you have to read chapter 6, okay? Now, in Genesis chapter 7 is when the great floods begin. And God starts, verse 11, you'll see where he starts using the date that he starts using, and the year that he starts using has to do with Noah's life. Where it's the second month, the 17th day, the 600th year. That's Noah's age, 600 years old. When Noah finally had his sons, he was 500 years old. So whenever all this took place is when Noah was 600 years old. So I don't know how many years it took for Noah to build that ark or anything like that. Only we can only speculate and stuff like that. But the Bible is awesome. You can learn a lot from reading the Bible. And I would want to, like I said, I might go into more details in future videos. But right now I'm just doing a short summary of Genesis. Now in chapter 8, hold on. Let's get back to Genesis chapter 7. So he gives a date and the time, the 600 year, whenever the great flood starts. But it's also whenever God shuts Noah and the family in the ark. And I say that God did it because you could read in verse 16, chapter 7, and I'm hoping you're following along. But it says right there in verse 16, it tells you right here, it says, so those that entered, male and female of all flesh, went in as God had commanded him, and the Lord shut him in. I believe the word of God fully, 100%. What the Bible says, that it happened that way. I'm not going to try to change it. I'm not going to try to add anything to it. It's written in here. There are many different versions, yes, and they might use different words, but that's what they're saying, and it should be saying that God's the one that shut him in. God made sure that everything was securely closed. Like I was saying in my Facebook page, you know how sometimes we leave sometimes and we're in a hurry, because he had to get them in there because the flood was coming already, and so sometimes when we leave in a hurry, we don't always shut the doors right. We might forget to shut windows, this and that. So God secured Noah in the ark with his family. He shut the door behind him. He made sure everything was shut and everything was done right regarding them being in the ark safely and protected from the floods that was fixing to happen. So here, that's in chapter 7. So now we're going to get to chapter 8, and this is where the ark finally rested on the mountain. And this was 7 months. This was on the 7th month. Remember, it began on the 2nd month, so it was 5 months later on the 17th day of the 600th year of Noah's life. So then we get, and that's just verse 4. Now verse 5 is where it's the 10th month. So 3 months later, on the first day, the tops of the mountains were finally being able to, they could see them. That was just the tops of the mountain, not the whole mountain, just the top part of it. And then finally on the 601st year, on the first month, on the first day, the waters were dried up upon the earth. So it took 2 months for it to even get to that point, right? After the 10th month, when just the tops of the mountains could be seen, then 2 months later, I say 2 months because 12 months is a year, right? So the 601st year, so probably 12 months, 3 months later, right? Because it's the first month of the first year after 600. So then so it took another 3 months. Then we get to the second month, the 27th day of the 601st year. The earth was dried, and Noah came out of the ark. It took a long time there, right? It's very detailed. If you pay attention, God is giving you dates. He's giving you the days. He's giving you months, so you can follow along and make these notes for yourself. Write them down in your Bible, so you can have this for future use, or even as a study for yourself with somebody else. Now, then God makes a covenant with creation. In verse 21, remember what Lamech said, and remember the curse and all that. Let's go to chapter 8, verse 21. Okay, did y'all find it? Now, here he's saying, this is God speaking. And the Lord smelled a soothing aroma. Then the Lord said in his heart, I will never again curse the ground for man's sake. Although the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth, nor will I again destroy every living thing as I have done. So this Lamech, the grandpa who died so many years before the flood, I believe it was like 7 years before the flood, he believed that his son, Lamech, the father of Noah, believed and had faith that his son was going to be the one that God was going to use to comfort the world, comfort them from having to toil the ground anymore. He was going to remove that curse, and that's exactly what God did. God removed the curse because he was pleased with Noah. Noah's the only one that survived from the flood. Noah and his 3 sons and their wives. Nobody else was left in the world, and just the animals that Noah was told to take with him in the ark by God. So this is awesome to see here, and this is just in chapter 8. So it's an awesome thing to pay attention to. This is a long chapter right here to me because it's so detailed and it gives so much information. But Lamech's father was right. His trust in God was strong, and he knew that the Lord was going to use his son. He didn't get to see it, but he had that faith that it was going to happen, and that was awesome to see. Okay, now we're going to be in chapter 9, where the Lord tells them to be fruitful and multiply because it's only 8 people there, right? Now, they're going to multiply, but it's just going to be the 3 sons and their wives, not Noah and his wife. Noah's already 601 years old, and his sons now will be the ones that the whole world's going to be repopulated by. And I did do a deal on Noah and his 3 sons and how, see, it's Shem right here. Shem, Ham, and Japheth. That's where the whole world is going to be repopulated, and all this is going to start happening through them. Okay? Now, now God did something that he introduces something in chapter 9, and that is he made a promise that he will not do that, right? Remember when he said, I will never do that again in chapter 8? Well, in chapter 9, he does something to remind himself, to God, that he will not do that, and that's he makes a rainbow. So whenever you see a rainbow after it rains and everything, kids, or whenever y'all see that in the sky, that's God's reminder to himself of the promise he made to himself that he would not flood the earth again, ever. And he's not going to do that to the land because of man's sake, because of our ugliness. Man, not just man, like just a man, women. No, he's girls. He's also talking to us too, women. You know, we need to be careful how we behave and what we do, because the Lord did say, just don't take it for granted. He's not going to harm that no more. Oh, let's go crazy. No. So that's what he did. God made that rainbow as a promise as a reminder of the promise that he made. So when it starts raining too much and stuff like that, and it stops, and then this rainbow pops out, like the Lord reminded to himself. Now, Noah and his sons, they are the ones that populated the whole earth from that time of the flood all the way to the present time today. And there was an incident that happened between Noah and his 3 sons. One of his youngest son, his name is Ham. He found Noah because Noah was a farmer. He started growing grapes and all that, and he got drunk from the juice of the grapes. and he was in his own tent, and he was asleep, knocked out, I guess, from too much drinking the fruit, the wine juice and all that, for the juice of the grapes. And he was naked, but he was in his own tent. And his son went in there to go, I guess, check on his dad or talk to his dad. And whenever he saw his dad like that, he didn't cover him up. He went and called his brothers, his other two brothers, to tell them, hey, guess what? Dad's in his tent all naked and everything. When his sons went in there, the other two sons, they covered him up. They walked backwards. If you read, you'll read where it says they walked backwards with a cover and covered him up. When Noah woke up, he heard about what his younger son did, and he cursed his son. And you want to see what happens with that curse, because the curse is kind of harsh, but at the same time, what his son did wasn't proper. So then we get to chapter 10, and this is where you get introduced to Noah's family tree. We already know where he came from, because Noah, was alive before the flood. So we saw the family tree. You get to see the family tree from that time, right? And now this is from Noah and his three sons, because they're the ones that are populating the whole the whole earth. So you get to see, all their children and everything like that. Noah's family tree. And again, you could get a piece of paper and you can start writing this down. So you can start looking at it, and you don't have to keep going back and forth to the page and everything. Now, let's get to Genesis chapter 11, which is the Tower of Babel. And I know a lot of churches, they do a study on this, on the Tower of Babel, how one time there was one language, one speech. Everybody spoke the same language. Everybody spoke the same. Everyone understood everybody. There was no problems understanding anyone. But because they all knew one language and they all understood each other, they were very smart, because there was no confusion. They started building this tower, and this tower, they wanted to build it so high to get to the heavens. They wanted to reach way up there. And the Lord came down to visit. I love the way the Bible talks about God coming down, and he visits with those that he created, with the people, with men, with women. And he came down and he visited, and he was watching what they were doing, and he was like, I don't think this is good, right? And so he caused confusion with the language. He caused them to start speaking. So a lot of them started speaking languages that one couldn't understand. So it's like a group could understand this language, a group could understand that language, but not all of them now were able to understand one another. So they stopped building that, and they took off and were scattered among the whole world. And so that's what the Lord God Almighty did in chapter 11. And you also get to meet Shem's family tree. And Shem is one of Noah's sons, right? So here it is. And the reason that you get to meet his family tree is because this is the tree that is going to lead to this tree branch. It's where you're going to meet Abraham. It's through Shem's branch of the three sons of Noah that Abraham comes from. And so that's why it starts with him. And you'll get to see that, and it's good for you to follow along and everything. So this is where we meet Abraham, but Abram, before he gets called Abraham. And so he comes from the son of Noah, Shem. And then you meet Terah, which is Abraham's father, or Abram's father, and you see his family tree. And so you get to also you get to know who Abraham's brothers are and everything. And then that's what you read in chapter 11. And Genesis chapter 12 is whenever God first speaks to Abram, and he tells him about the promise, that he's going to lead him to take him to a land, and it's going to be his, and he's going to make him a father of many nations and all that. And Abraham is 75 years old during this time. Now, Abraham is 75 years old, but Shem, his grandfather, 7 times. The reason I say 7 times because it's great, 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 great grandfather is still alive during this time, because Shem lived to be 602 years old. So he is still alive. So and he's from the flood. Remember, he was the only him and his two brothers and his dad were the only ones living in this world at the time. And here he is able to see his great 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 grandson, Abraham, and he was still around, so he was probably able to tell him the story of the flood and everything like that. Continue to pass on what happened, after even be able to tell them some of the things that happened before the flood because he was around then too. Okay, so it's just amazing how things are done, the way the Lord allows us to see this stuff. And then here we have Abraham in Egypt, and it talks a little bit about how when he was in Egypt, he told the Pharaoh that Sarah, his wife, and her name at this time was Sarai, that was his sister. He was not lying though. That was his sister, but from a different mother. But either way, they were siblings. You just have to read this part so you can understand. Okay? Now, Genesis chapter 13 is about when Abraham inherits Canaan. This is when God is introducing him to the land. He lets him see it. He's in it. And he's telling him, this is the land you're going to inherit. This is the land I told you I was going to give you. I promised to give to you and your family and your future uh, generations and all that. Now, when Abraham um, set off on this journey that God sent him to, he took along his nephew Lot. And Lot and him, they were blessed very much by God. And God, he, I'm sorry guys, I hope I'm not boring you. I'm just trying to make it short, but you really got to read these chapters for yourself. You can't be relying on other people to tell you everything that's in the Bible. I want you to want to open up the chapters, and I want you to want to read them. That's what I want you to do. That's what I'm giving you a summary right now, okay? Now, again, back to chapter 13. Adam and Lot split up. Okay, Lot was his nephew. He was his older, one of his brothers that passed away before Abraham's father did and everything. Um, and they split up here. So he ends up taking they split up the land where they were going to be staying at because each of them had too many flocks. They couldn't all be together. They were fighting over wells and causing a lot of, chaos. So they split up, and Lot wanted to go towards the city. He wanted to be closer to the city. So he ends up going towards Sodom and Gomorrah. And Abraham took the other side. And whenever he did that, God let him know, look, this is all going to be yours. And he starts telling them about what he was going to give them. Now, chapter 14 is where Lot gets taken captive by some kings, Sodom, Gomorrah, and a lot of the people there, because Lot was close to them. He was also taken by some kings because they wanted to, take Sodom and Gomorrah. So they take the people and everything like that. And Abraham gets told that, hey, your nephew was taken by these kings. And Abraham, he loved his nephew. He was like a brother to him. That was his